In this lesson, we'll cover using filters. So let's say you want to actually select something. For example, on the Revit model we're looking at, I want to select all the columns that sit at the intersection of all the column grids. You could pick on them one by holding the Control key, or an easier method is just to click a point, hold the left mouse button down, and drag. And let's say I drag this window that's dashed from right to left, and then release it. Well, what happened was I selected everything that it crossed and it surrounded. So I did select the columns and also selected the grid lines, but I don't want the grid lines. So this is where I can use filter. So with something selected, when you have multiple categories or families, you can filter out the ones you don't want or the ones you want to keep. So with all of this selected, if I click filter on the ribbon, it's going to show me now what categories of elements and the count within each category that I selected. Well, I want the columns. There's 16 selected. What I don't want are the grid lines. So I'll uncheck mark the grids and then click OK. This will only now select those columns. So you can see you could use filter to actually filter in or out more or less depending on what you want to select. Now let's say this is something that you want to readily select or repeatedly select over and over, or at a later instance. You can actually save this filter selection set. On the ribbon to the very right of filter in the selection panel, you have a save button. Clicking save will ask you, what do you want to name this current selected filtered set? I'm just going to call it all columns. Now, I may want to name it something else, but in this example, I'm just going to call it this. Go ahead and click OK. This will then save this as a filtered selection set. So let's go ahead and click in the background or click Modify to deselect. So your next question may be, well, how do I get that selection set back? Well, one method is to go to the Manage tab on the ribbon. Once you click on the Manage tab, in the selection panel, you have an icon to load selection. So when you click Load Selection, it's going to list all of the custom filters that you've saved that you can now recall. Here's the one we called All Columns. Select All Columns, click OK, and now all of those columns are actually selected without me having to go through and reselect and filter out again. Now, if you wanted to, let's say, remove some columns from this selection set, or you added new columns and you want to add them to the selection set, once you're viewing this custom filter on the selection panel on the right, click Edit. This will ask you, well, what filter do you want to edit? In this case, I'll choose All Columns. Click Edit on the right, and now the ribbon changes, allowing me to add or remove elements from the selection set. The columns are highlighted in bold, or they're darker than everything else, meaning they are selected. If you wanted to deselect something, you would select Remove from Selection and choose a column you want to remove. If you want to add something to the selection, click Add to Selection, and then select what you want to add. When done, click Finish Selection. That updates this selection filter, and then all you have to do is click OK, so the next time you use it, it's already updated, displaying and selecting those elements that are part of that filter. So as a review, in this lesson, we talked about using filters. We talked about first, if you select more things or more elements than what you want, you can use a filter to filter out pieces that you don't want and filter in the pieces that you just want. Then we talked about saving this filter as a custom selection set, where you basically give it a name and then at a later point, you can recall this custom filtered selection so you don't have to select and deselect all these elements again. We also looked at editing this filter. So you can add things to it or remove things from it as you design and build within Revit.